Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jennifer Berkshire, freelance journalist, co-host of the Have You Heard podcast, author of The Education Wars, Citizen's Guide and Defense Manual, co-authored with Jack Schneider. Talk to her about what Democrats are doing in terms of education and maybe what we can anticipate from Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, at least 86 Democratic lawmakers to boycott accused war criminal Bibi Netanyahu's speech in front of Congress today. Harris campaign begins in earnest, with polling already showing she's gaining ground. In response, Republican lawmakers meet, and leadership begs them to try and not be overtly racist and misogynist in response.
Good luck.
Monday was the hottest day on Earth, which broke the previous record set on Sunday of this week. Joe Biden to address the nation tonight at 8 p.m. if he's actually still alive. I should have got on that. Darn it. 7 major unions call on Biden to halt military aid to Israel as DropSite News reports a UN-leaked report shows that Israel has killed 366 UN workers and family members in Gaza. Elon Musk denies he's giving $45 million to Trump. Maybe it has something to do with J.D. Vance being the least popular VP pick in modern history. Maybe ever.
Oh, so good.
New Jersey Senator Menendez to resign in disgrace, but he's going to take 3 weeks to do it. Federal judge allows the FTC non-compete ban to go forward. Speaking of the FTC, they opened a surveillance pricing inquiry based upon the American Prospects reporting that we were discussing a couple of weeks ago. Elizabeth Warren to offer a bill that will essentially overturn the Supreme Court's attack on the Chevron doctrine. All this and more on today's Majority Report. God bless you.
Thank you. Whew. Just in time.
It is
Hump day.
Hump day. That's right.
Yes. Sorry about that, folks.
Sneeze day.
Now I got to leave the building.
People really don't want you to be sneezing or eating or doing anything like that.
I don't eat. I don't eat on camera.
All right.
That's
I mean,
a
if you say
thing.
so.
Yeah, we'll see.
We got a lot to get to today, folks. And we've been wanting to talk to Jennifer Berkshire for about 2.5 weeks. And it's sometimes hard to anticipate how much news you're going to have in the middle of the summer. But it has been a little bit more than we anticipated. Nevertheless, let's start with this. There are boycotts. And it actually, we could be up to more than 86 at this point in terms of lawmakers, all Democratic lawmakers, we should say, who are boycotting Netanyahu's speech. You can imagine who some of those are in the House. I'm happy to report that well, he's not my congressman, but he's from Worcester. Jim McGovern not going. Of course, the squad members not going.
Bernie, Warren in the Senate. There is one Republican, Thomas Massey.
I was going to say, is Massey?
Apologies. Yes, Massey will not be going. Mark Takano. I mean, there's many, many more, obviously. In terms of the senators who aren't going to be attending, Bernie, Warren, Murray. We have
Merkley,
three. Berkeley, Merkley,
Van Hollen.
Van Hollen, and who's the sixth? I mean, I imagine Tim Kaine is also not going. He actually boycotted the last time that Netanyahu came, to his credit. So, this is something that was predictable, and I think we're going to continue to see. Look, Kamala Harris does not have a particularly dissentful record when it comes to Israel. She has spoken in front of AIPAC many times. She received a good amount of donations from AIPAC. She has said in the past that she's a stalwart supporter of Israel. I don't know what is in Kamala Harris's heart about Israel, but I do know that Joe Biden is about as bad as you can get on Israel and be a Democrat, A. And B, if Bibi Netanyahu had spoken in front of Congress in September of 2023, you would not have 68 Democrats, 86, 68. I can't remember now.
86.
86 Democrats boycotting the speech. So the politics around Israel have changed dramatically. We have seen Israel kill, a minimum of 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza. The number ultimately is going to be far more. We have that Lancet study that anticipates that anywhere from 150,000 to 250,000 civilians in Gaza will be dead after this. It could be more. We know that there's polio running, that they're finding in wastewater now, that nearly 400,000 had to again literally run out of Khan Yunis. Some of the images and the videos are just horrifying.
They gave them minutes, and they're just shuffling this population around and by giving them minutes before saying, like, hey, we're going to bomb or we're going to open fire. And terrorizing them. So that's part of the point, too, is to not just kill as many Palestinians as they can. It's also to strike fear and trauma in the hearts of people.
Extinguish hope.
Without a doubt. And I've seen interviews with doctors who have gone over there talking about small children with multiple sniper fires, and doctors who have been in war zones who say, I've never seen anything like this at all. Just a absolute horror show what has been done to the people of Gaza, and so I can't say with any confidence that Kamala Harris is going to make any meaningful changes to our policy in regards to Israel. I don't think anybody can make that statement right now. I feel pretty confident in saying that I don't think that she is going to be as bad as Biden.
Well, Biden was uniquely horrible. Like, I want people to understand that Peter Beinart wrote in 2020, because this question was asked before, obviously, the active genocide began, if conditioning aid to Israel was, it was when the debates were between, I think, Sanders, Warren, and Buttigieg and Biden at the time. And Biden was the only one who said he wouldn't condition aid to Israel, and he has a long record of ideological Zionism and being maybe the most pro-Israel Democratic senator in D.C. So, with her,
he embarrassed Menachem Begin.
Yeah.
If you believe Begin, I mean, he embarrassed Menachem Begin with how bloodthirsty he was relative to Israel's, in this case, it was the assault in Lebanon.
And just call me like on hopium or whatever, but the fact that she was the first administration official to call for a ceasefire on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and then had to walk it back because they edited her speech, the fact that she was leaking to the press, trying to distance herself from the president's policy, which is very difficult to do as VP, saying she was more sympathetic to the Palestinians. I've spoken to at least one person who had previously worked in the administration who says the consensus among people in the State Department of the people who've been critical is that she'll be more sympathetic. The point is that there's nowhere to go but up. And I also think Obama experienced this a bit with Netanyahu because he's such an obvious racist, and when you just interact with him, there's like being a person of color, I think there's a different relationship where you can see Zionism as racism in the way that it is. And there's a reason that the first 24 or so members of the House to call for a ceasefire were all POC. So I'm not saying you could be a Richie Torres too, but I do think there's a fundamental difference in people's experiences, especially when Harris, came from parents who were both immigrants, and her mother talks about the experience of colonialism in India, versus Biden, who romanticizes America, romanticizes Israel. It's just different ideologically, in my view.
I mean, I remember that reminds me of when Peter Beinart was on the program and said, if you really want to know where someone stands on this, a very good proxy is like the 1619 Project. But that aside, too, we should also say that Kamala Harris's chief foreign policy advisor was a close advisor of Obama's, who was the biggest proponent of the Iran nuclear deal, which was in my estimation, Obama's biggest achievement in foreign policy.
Agreed.
And so there is, by thy advisor, one can sometimes divine where they're going. So we'll see. But in the meantime, people are protesting Bibi Netanyahu. He was staying at, was it the Watergate Hotel last night?
Yep.
And apparently he had to change rooms because of this.
Projected his face.
Arrest
Projected
Netanyahu.
his face, arrest Netanyahu on the hotel.
Greg Stoker, I think, shot that friend of the show. Shot that video. So credit to him.
Let's also, this is the protest that they're seeing today. This is out on the mall, right? Is that right? The Washington Monument Mall.
And we should say that hundreds of Jewish Voice for Peace activists, I think, were arrested yesterday at the Capitol.
Stop arming Israel now! Stop arming Israel now!
So people are out there and, protesting Netanyahu. I should also just add, before we sort of switch gears here, that Biden's going to be on television tonight at 8 p.m. I mean, if you actually believe that it's really Biden and not some guy in a mask, as a lot of the people on the right wing are claiming.
Including the dental assistant who cleaned my teeth yesterday, asked me if Biden was really dead. She's heard he's been dead for months. I said, I'm not sure.
Clean my teeth and I'll tell you.
Well, regardless, the AI version of Biden that's going to be on your TVs tonight, it will be, we'll get an indication. I find it hard to believe that he's giving this speech on the day that Netanyahu speaks, and he won't address this. I mean, it's largely going to be, about, I would imagine, and I haven't seen any reporting on this, but I would imagine about what he intends to complete in his the final months. Well, one of those may be, he thinks he can forge Middle East peace in some fashion. We'll see. But so we'll have a better sense of this. And tomorrow, Emma's going to be doing one of her interviews is going to be on the situation as well. So stay tuned. We will obviously be talking about Bibi's speech in front of Congress. My understanding is that Mike Johnson has said very explicitly, zero tolerance for protests in the House.
How about free speech, buddy?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I just want to shout out my favorite Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib, quote yesterday on Twitter, Netanyahu is a war criminal committing genocide against the Palestinian people. It is utterly disgraceful that leaders from both parties have invited him to address Congress. He should be arrested and sent to the International Criminal Court. That's my favorite statement on the matter so far.
Good job by her. And with all my more optimism about the direction Harris could go versus Biden in just at least a marginally better direction, Rashida Tlaib and the uncommitted movement will be, and it's good that they're going to try to leverage this moment before the convention to get more concessions. I'm also deeply encouraged by seeing the fact that the UAW, other major unions, the SEIU, which has close ties to Harris, all signed a letter yesterday saying that we should stop sending weapons to Israel. So that is an indication hey, Harris, you got to be responsive to us here.
Yep.
And let me just add, F. Chuck Schumer. I have had problems with him for years, but this is really disgraceful and pathetic. Chuck Schumer was calling for his dismissal as prime minister as recently as January, I believe it was, in some attempt to, I don't know what he was attempting to do. And Chuck Schumer, I guess he's up for re-election probably another 2 years, is it, Bradley, or is it another 4? I think it's 2.
I think 4 because I think it's a
4.
little bit of a longer runway. That's some of the speculation about AOC, right? If she could be angling for it.
I mean, we got the get the checkout banner still.
I'm looking it over.
Is that from 2020?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, that means that he's running again in 2 years, in 2026.
I'm seeing that he's up until 28 actually.
Well, regardless,
wow.
I
well,
can't
that's what
wait.
I'm saying. I think that's what
wait
AOC
to
is angling
volunteer
for.
in that campaign. I may have to take a leave of absence, unless he has a pair of handcuffs in his pocket, and when Netanyahu looks to shake his hand, he slaps the cuffs on him, and that's about it.
Oh,
that's my dream.
The Baileys aren't answering their phone anymore.
Psych.
That's right. Next time the Baileys call, I'll answer. All right, let's just briefly get into this, because I heard this morning. As I've said for quite a time, I listen to the AP at the morning, top of the hour, bottom of the hour news, just to get a sense of what normies are hearing. And we have this clip from the AP. Which is just amazing. One of the things that we were saying in the run up to, before Biden actually dropped out, was that what would work in Harris's favor is that the truncated period of time in which they would campaign against Harris, they would all immediately, the Republicans, would not be able to help themselves in saying DEI candidate, racist or misogynist things, and that with a 24-month or 18-month campaign, they could exercise that and get that out of their system in the first couple of months, and then figure out some nuanced way of saying the same thing, but to shroud it a little bit more. Well, they didn't have time to do that, and this is what the AP reported this morning.
Focus on Vice President and now presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Republican leaders in the House have some advice for lawmakers who plan to talk about her.
At a closed-door meeting of House Republicans, leaders warned party members against using overtly racist and sexist attacks against Vice President Kamala Harris. House Speaker Mike Johnson telling reporters after,
"This is not personal with regard to Kamala Harris, and her ethnicity or her gender have nothing to do with this whatsoever.
Urging lawmakers to stick to criticizing her role in the current administration's policies.
How? Like, the idea that you have to assemble your caucus and say, don't be overtly racist or misogynist.
And it's the number one headline on the 6 a.m. AP headline news.
Oh my God. And the news station, the music station I was listening to, they played it at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour, the same clip.
Oh my God.
I mean, this is honestly like the only thing I'd say, like going into a room full of like teenagers or young adults and saying, hey guys, listen, just want to remind you, if you go to the bathroom and you happen to get a little poop on your hands, please wash your hands and for God's sakes, don't put it in your mouth. Like, I mean, the idea.
I like how it's teenagers in your example, because that's exactly. Like, they should know this by now.
Exactly.
Like in the way that
little kids.
Right. This is not like 5-year-olds. Yes.
The idea that they need to go behind closed doors and say, look, reminder, don't be overly racist, please, is just everything you need to know about that party.
I have some behind the scenes.
Donald Trump. This is not Donald Trump. This is the Republican Party.
Here's some more secret audio from Mike Johnson behind closed doors.
See, so this is why you guys don't get invited places.
You have to have real conversations, like how she's a DEI candidate. Oh, shoot. Damn it. I did it again.
All right. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Jennifer Berkshire. She's a journalist and co-host of Have You Heard podcast, author of The Education Wars, Citizen's Guide and Defense Manual, co-authored with Jack Schneider. But speaking of education, you want to know the best way to learn a language? It's immersion. Live where the language is spoken and use it every day. So if you want to learn a language and you want to learn Spanish, move to Spain or move to Mexico. But if you cannot do that, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that is with Babbel. Let me just say this. I don't know if this is an idiom, but vamos, mamala. Right. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Shit.
I wanted to say let's go. I'm picking up phrases, but I don't know if that's I have a feeling that could be an idiom, but I'm not sure. Anyways, Babbel is super easy to use, and it is incredibly effective. Babbel is a science-backed language learning app that actually works. You don't have to pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors. You don't waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's got quick 10-minute lessons that apparently are handcrafted by over 200 language experts, and they help you speak a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable. They are super accessible. They're rooted in real life situations. You don't go through all of like past pluperfect, no, that's not the way you do it. They are delivered with conversation-based teaching. So you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. It's almost like you're immersed for 10 minutes a day. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove that Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. So I am telling that to Mila, and I'm going to save myself some cash. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold, plus all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. And here's a special, limited time. It's a deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for Majority Report listeners at babbel.com/majority. Get up to 60% off at Babbel, BABBEL.com/majority. Again, that's BABBEL.com/majority. Babbel.com/majority. Rules and restrictions apply. Going to take a quick break and head into the fun half. Excuse me. Going to take a quick break and we'll come back with Jennifer Berkshire. Anyway. I got distracted because someone just IM'd Babel cannot teach users to speak Biden. I don't think it's an available language. It's not nice.
Anyways,
quick break. We'll be right back with Jennifer Berkshire, journalist, co-host of Have You Heard podcast, author of The Education Wars, a citizen's guide and defense manual, co-authored with Jack Schneider. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Jennifer Berkshire, freelance journalist, co-host of Have You Heard podcast, author of The Education Wars, a citizen's guide and defense manual, which she co-authored with Jack Schneider, who we've also had on the program a couple of times. Jennifer, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor to be back.
So, and we've talked over the years, and I think I probably first interviewed Jack during the Obama years, maybe even in the first or maybe early second term. There's been so much that's happened with education fights, public education fights, really since the Bush years, in terms of like a concerted assault that took a couple of different sort of like, I guess, a couple of different forms, I should say. And on some level, like it feels like over the past 5 years, really during the Biden administration, and maybe even prior to that, that like the Democrats have sort of like gotten out of the game, as it were, in pushing back on what's happening. It's been very, very strange. I know that's why you wrote the book, but just expand on that and give people a sense of where we're at.
Yeah, because we could identify for folks what the Republicans have been up to over the last several years, and they would recognize instantly the way that, Republicans leapt on an issue like parents' rights, and how they were so convinced after Glenn Youngkin's upset win in Virginia that this was going to be their issue. This was going to be the thing that attracted suburban women back into the fold, right? People recognize that story instantly. And then you ask them, well, gee, what have the Democrats been up to? And the answer is not a whole lot. That, they got very excited during the Obama years, as you mentioned. They went all in on a particular vision of fixing schools. We were going to have a lot more charter schools. We love testing. We were going to evaluate teachers on the basis of their student test scores. And that agenda has really fallen by the wayside, partly because the Republicans have moved so far to the right now. The bipartisan consensus has really fallen apart, but also because the Democrats just don't have a lot to say. And that is actually a big part of why we wrote the book, to try to wake folks up, to say, hey, we have this thing, this public education system that is actually like a real national success story. It's amazing that we provide kids with education K through 12 that they don't have to pay for, that we tax ourselves to make sure everybody gets it. You could never set something up like that today? Why are you guys, you Democrats, having such a hard time making the case for an institution that's as important as this one?
Well, maybe we could see a shift if Kamala Harris picks someone like Bashir over Shapiro, right? Like those two people are a massive contrast in between the perspectives that you describe.
That is absolutely right. So Bashir is the governor of Kentucky, where private school vouchers are going to be on the ballot in November. Kentuckians will go to the polls to decide whether they want to change their state constitution to allow for taxpayer dollars to go to religious schools. And everywhere this gets put up for a vote, people vote against it. They hate this idea. And so you've got Bashir out there saying, you know, like really positioning himself as a loud advocate for public schools because he recognizes that it's good politics. He recognizes that his state, which is very rural, has staunch supporters of public schools, even in its reddest counties. And then you contrast that with Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, who's the only Democratic governor to be a voucher supporter. And honestly, to come out with a position like that right now, when we can look at these states where Republicans are enacting these sweeping school voucher programs that don't do any of the things that we've been promised over the last couple decades, that it turns out not to have anything to do with kids in quote unquote failing schools or the civil rights issue of our time. What they're doing is they're picking up the tab for parents who already send their kids to private schools, affluent parents, and they're blowing up their state budgets in the meantime. So I would be so sad to see somebody like a Shapiro picked, not just because I think that school vouchers are a terrible issue, but because they're really, you know, they have the potential to rally folks across party lines. And how stupid of the Democrats if they were to give up on that opportunity.
All right. Before we get into like, you know, that, I want to go back though first, because I want to give like a sense of like where we have been, why the Democrats have disengaged in this, and what the sort of the fundamental underlying importance of public education is. And people should remember that really, you know, public education wasn't invented in Reconstruction, but it was really established as a federal sort of project in Reconstruction because of the understanding that having a public education system was crucial to creating equality and to creating the sort of like the fundamental aspects of citizenship in our country. I mean, it's no coincidence that it was a Reconstruction project. And I know that is like sort of like what has been missing on some level from this conversation. I want to circle back that, but could you just like briefly walk us through? We had No Child Left Behind, then we had Race to the Top, which was aided and abetted by the Obama administration. This sort of like corporate education reform, not to a large extent sort of accelerated by the Gates Foundation. And then they found out that it didn't work by their own Rand Corporation report, that their whole project was a mistake. They should have listened. But we had a generation or two of teachers who were brought in, and one generation completely demoralized, it seems, and a new generation that was brought in without any sort of like foundational appreciation of what I think public education was about. Can you walk us through some of that history?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I think it's so important for people to realize that all the policies that you just laid out very clearly there, they're all still on the books in all of these states. So you have a lot of places right now where teachers are dealing with the intense culture war stuff from the right, while at the same time, they're still under the kind of, you know, the gun of No Child Left Behind, and then the ratcheting up of that from the Obama administration, which was basically to say, you know, we're going to hold you, teacher, accountable for student test scores. And then, you know, during that whole long period between George W. Bush and Obama, the way that we came to understand public schools and their function in society drastically narrowed. And so those really important words that we heard from you, Sam, things like equality and citizenship, those were never mentioned. Instead, it was all about college and career, and we were going to define school and whether it was good or not on the basis of whether or not it raised student test scores. And so you fast forward to the present, and the reason that the campaign on the right to dismantle public schools, to defund them, to move as many kids as possible into private religious schools, it has nothing to do with test scores or teacher evaluations at all. In fact, one of the truly astonishing things about these huge voucher programs that Republicans are setting up in all of these states, and we're about to reach our 12th state where one of these programs is on the books now, that these programs actually make it impossible to track the performance of students in schools. That's how we know that all the rhetoric around student achievement turned out that really wasn't what people cared about, particularly on the right. And so you see this sort of full frontal attack on public schools. And I think what Jack and I are so concerned about is that we have a very short window of time to remind people that what you were talking about, Sam, the fact that we have public education in this country in the first place because of that vision of equality, right? And it's why we're so often disappointed in schools, because we hope so fervently that they're going to make the country a more equal place. And we can talk about why that's so difficult, but having an entire party that has forgotten the role of schools in preparing kids for citizenship, forgotten that they're a pillar of our democracy. So I'm here today, and I think you are here today to try to wake them up to that reality.
Yeah, I think this is so fundamentally misunderstood, I think. And it's very much, I mean, look, this is one of the most sort of like late stage capitalist sort of, I think, phenomena that we have, which is where education is reduced to being strictly a something that you can measure in terms of return on investment in dollars, as opposed to like social cohesion, citizenship, community, all of these other things that an education was supposed to, mobility, just in terms of not just like economic mobility, but just sort of being able to meet other people and express ideas, and all of this seems to have been lost. And it's fascinating to me, the dynamic between, you have these right wingers who fundamentally despise public education because of this. I mean, it goes back. You can just see all this stuff play out in Reconstruction. They do not want, what was an underclass at that time to have the ability to sort of like say, like, wait, these are my rights. This is what I am, an equal part of society, et cetera, et cetera. You have that on the right. And then you have the sort of the neoliberal agenda, which supposedly is going to maximize this return on investment, measured by the same way that you would measure an investment if it was corporate. They go in there, and what they do is they basically till up the ground and destroy that connection, that mental connection between what public education is supposed to be. It's supposed to be to develop good citizens. That goes by the wayside. So all you have left is this like husk. And then Betsy DeVos comes in, and talk about Betsy DeVos, because you say, I think the chapter is, okay, it's not, well, I don't know exactly which chapter it was, but the idea that like, they don't have a problem with public education, but they have a problem with public schools. Like Betsy DeVos and her husband were big on this. They want that dumb money. They just want it to go different places.
Yeah, people have forgotten about Betsy DeVos because, she stepped down towards the end of Trump's term, and then we didn't hear much from her. But she is an enormous bankroller of all of the stuff that's playing out in red states right now. And so there was some terrific CNN reporting that her group has spent something like $250 billion with a B, dollars on trying to get these voucher programs through with great success. And I think the point you make is so good because, you know, the Democrats who were very keen on something like school choice, folks like Cory Booker, for example, or even Barack Obama, they really believed that we had, you know, that the end goal was something like public charter schools, that, you know, we would fund them with our tax dollars, and then we would be so impressed by the fact that they were able to raise student test scores, and that would be it. And of course, that wasn't it at all. The end goal for folks like Betsy DeVos, it's not even just to move funds from public school to private religious schools. It's to completely redefine education so that it's divorced from any place at all. They use the expression unbundling all the time, the way that we're now supposed to unbundle from our cable companies and just stream stuff. And so that's the idea, that's the vision for schooling, that your parents would just buy stuff on Amazon and call it school. And think about what an alienating existence that is. Think about all of the problems we face right now that absolutely demand a collective solution. And here you are rolling through these policies that are intended to defund schools, even in rural communities where public schools, as we all know, are the central public institution.
Right. And also, I would say that that's a big motivation for the right in cutting into school lunches, cutting arts and after school programs, but also saying like, hey, you've got to pay for your lunch. And this should not be a institution for the community where kids can go and be a part of a community and learn from one another. We want to make this as threadbare as possible so that perhaps alternatives look better. I mean, this is just classic austerity politics at the end of the day.
I think that that's a key observation. And then the other thing that I would really encourage folks to do is to pay attention to how you see these policies all being enacted together. It is no coincidence at all that the same states that now have sweeping school voucher policies on the books are also rolling back protections for child workers. They're also saying that we're not going to participate in the federal school lunch program. You know, we're not going to pay for all kids to have school lunch. And so I think the question that we have to ask is, how do the folks who are enacting these policies, how do they see the world? And I think that our sort of logical conclusion is always that, well, they're interested in making more money. You know, Betsy DeVos and her ilk see this as an opportunity to cash in. But we argue in the book that it's actually something much more fundamental, that these folks look around and they see hierarchy and inequality as the natural state of the world. And something that works against that, like public education, fully funded schools where kids get to learn all kinds of stuff, that works against the natural state of things. And as they see it, you know, there are just some kids who were meant to go into the bean fields or the factories or the mines. And so doesn't it just make a lot of sense then to start dismantling the institution, the main institution we have in this country that says, you kid can be whatever you want to be?
I mean, there's Paul Wolfowitz famously got in front of Congress in describing why they went after Iraq. And they said weapons of mass destruction was the thing we could all agree on. And that sort of feels like the assault on education. For Betsy DeVos, if she had the ability, just like the government will function to collect the taxes, and then we will take that money and we will fund basically, you know, what they would call in Pakistan madrasas, religious schools. And then some of the wealthy people would also, I mean, let's talk about the voucher program, the reality of vouchers. And then we could talk about charters. But the reality of vouchers is that in every place it's been employed, and to the extent that there's been any accountability, people have found that the number of students who are actually going to secular private schools is incredibly low for the first time. In other words, they were already going. This is a subsidy to rich people to go to that private school. There has been some people who go for the first time to like religious schools, but the number of people who it's actually like supposedly what's sold on, like we're going to give real choice, that's not happening.
No, it's not happening at all. And that's, like these programs make it very difficult to track where the money's going, but we do have access to that data. And in state after state, the statistics are staggering. 75%, 80%, and even states that have had voucher programs on the books for a long time, a state like Indiana or Ohio, over time, you see the percentages of kids who are, say, kids of color or low-income kids, their participation in these programs is dropping, and the folks who are more likely to participate are getting wealthier. And actually, the statistics you cited about it's not secular private schools. That there are very few secular private schools in this country. This money
and
is
you're not
going,
getting into them with the $2,000 or $5,000 that you're getting from the voucher.
It is not going to pay for Phillips Exeter Academy. Instead, the money is going to pay the tuition for private religious schools for parents who already send their kids to those schools. Why does that matter? Because the folks who are proponents of this vision understand that it is now going to be next to impossible to take that benefit away. So suddenly you have not only a lobby group, a new lobby group in these states, but they are a lobby group of affluent parents with influence. And so you look at a state like Arizona, where their voucher program is turning out to be unbelievably expensive, close to now $1 billion a year. Not only is it cutting into school funding, public school funding, but it's forcing Arizona policymakers to make cuts to other programs, like, for example, water infrastructure. Can you imagine? It's 115 degrees in Arizona on a good day, and you are now cutting investment in water infrastructure so that you can pick up the tab for parents who already sent their kids to private religious schools. It makes no sense unless you have a real kind of a grim vision where we're all sort of fighting against each other for scraps.
Let's talk about charter schools too, in terms of the way they impact. I mean, it's been some time, but certainly in the run up to 2016, I spent a lot of time interviewing people about charter schools. One of the guys who had embedded himself at one of the Success Academy from like the Manhattan Institute, I can't remember his name at the moment, but by the end of the interview, I had him, even he, who was, and we should say, a charter school started off, it was an idea by the unions, his name escapes me at the moment, as a way of piloting what could be essentially laboratories where we could integrate certain teaching techniques or organizational techniques into the schools. That went by the wayside because it was hijacked. And this guy interviewed from the Manhattan Institute by the end was willing to admit that, like, well, they're not necessarily cherry picking the students, they're cherry picking the parents by basically creating, filters, if you will. You got to be here at 9 a.m., for a meeting, and it's absolutely mandatory. Well, that signifies that somebody's got, either the ability to get off their work at the time, more work flexibility, more money, or more sort of social resources where somebody can, watch the kid, or they can, whatever it is, they cherry pick parents. So the data shows that, some charter schools are better, some are worse than than the average. Exactly the same as public schools, essentially, except for there's also a lot of fraud that happens in charters because depending on which state, the way they set it up. But talk about how this is also sort of like a similar, sort of almost like parallel way of creating a cleave between this idea of what schools are supposed to be about, what public schools are supposed to be about, and this idea of like everybody wanting people to get a good education.
Yeah, well, so I know exactly who you're talking about. The gentleman's name is Robert Pondicio, and he's actually at the American Enterprise Institute, and that he wrote a book about Success Academy, which is a very successful and very popular charter school in New York. And what's telling about that example is that gentleman is now advising the very controversial Commissioner of Education in Oklahoma, who I'm sure you're familiar with, Ryan Walters.
Oh, you gotta be kidding
He's
me.
advising him on overhauling the social studies curriculum. He was just named to a high-flying commission along with some other famous names. One of them, Dennis Prager, the founder of PragerU, and Kevin Roberts from Heritage, who is all over Project 2025. And I think in many ways that shows you what has happened to the bipartisan coalition that was so enthusiastic about charter schools. The coalition has fallen apart. And so in many ways, charter schools are now quite vulnerable because they're at the party with not a lot of obvious friends. So there's a big push on the right to have charter schools redefined as private, so that then the protections of, say, the 14th Amendment wouldn't apply to the students who attend them. And yet, you also, you continue to have a real push within a certain branch of the Democratic Party. This would be the branch where the high-flying hedge funders congregate, right? They remain very enthusiastic about charter schools, both because of their record on achievement, and I'm thinking, primarily of urban charter schools, but because charter schools remain primarily non-union. So I think actually the conversation about charter schools has changed a lot. And if I were a charter school founder or a believer in them, I would be looking around right now, wondering if it might not make sense for me to be part of this larger coalition defending public schools, because charters actually have a whole lot to lose right now.
All right. Well, so just walk us through like sort of the fundamentals that we need to begin to, like the concepts that we need to rally around. And then let's talk about from a policy perspective, because I look out there and I see nothing in terms of like any type of pushback, both from a rhetorical standpoint or about like, and I imagine COVID is also sort of like really, really undermined this. I mean, we had all these things happen, and then COVID's outside of the 1.5 million people who, or 1 million plus, I should say, people who passed away, and the people who have like a long COVID, the biggest sort of, I think, like casualty was people's relationship to public schools, coming out of it. I mean, I think it's like, it's going to grow back in some way, but it's not, I don't know if it's going to grow back with the same sort of amount of vigor. And like, where is this, what needs to happen, and where is there any place where it's happening?
So there is actually, there is amazing organizing happening all over the country. And so that's a big part of our book, because I think what the impression that people get is that there were school closures, people got really mad, that gave rise to groups like Moms for Liberty, and here they are just doing, they are cleaning up. And actually that's not true at all. 3/4 of the places where Moms for Liberty and allied organizations like the 1776 PAC, 3/4 of the places where they run, they end up losing. Why is that? It's because broad coalitions of folks are coming together, not just to defend kids, but to really kind of rally their communities around the idea that public education is essential and that vulnerable students need to be protected. And so one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this stuff is that I actually see the organizing to defend and strengthen public education as some of the most exciting pushback against authoritarianism that's happening right now. And the reason it's taken off is precisely for what you were saying, Sam, that people on the ground in states like North Carolina, for example, where you have Republicans aggressively pushing to privatize schools, they understand that the goal is to turn back the clock 50 years or more on any kind of progress, and really to roll back the entire vision of equality and civil rights protections. And so I would argue that you're missing out on some incredible organizing, and that would be a great show for you to do.
Definitely. But I guess what I miss is maybe something programmatic. I mean, the organizing feels like it's a bulwark against, I mean, Moms from Liberty, they're lunatics. But what I feel like we need too is a proactive sort of a proactive movement.
Yes.
That is, the equivalent of like an Arnie Duncan, but for the good guys, for people who see the value. And like, I mean, I have always been just an ideological supporter of public schools. Like the idea of like, it wasn't necessarily an opportunity for me, particularly in New York, that my kids would go to private school, but I see the education that kids at private school get, and
I went to an all-girls school, right?
One to one high school students. The amount of like of academic understanding that they have higher in most private schools. I mean, without a doubt. But the experience of like being part of a community.
Yep.
Going to school with people who are so dramatically diverse from you. I mean, my daughter just happened to just coincidentally go to a public school that was probably one of the most diverse in the country, in Brooklyn, statistically speaking. But it is that, to me, like the argument that should be the highest value, because first of all, even from a return on investment issue, like, the reason why these schools pay off for the most part is just simply because you're hanging around with other rich people.
That's right.
And rich people, hire other rich people because that's what their community. It's not because when you were in, a junior in high school, you had your history class was more in depth. I mean, there's an opportunity for people to follow that. But that's not why you got hired at that job at Morgan Stanley or wherever it is, for that matter. And there seems to be a vacuum where we're not seeing a political leadership that is making that case. Like, I haven't heard a politician articulate this stuff in ages, it feels like.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to what Emma brought up at the beginning of our conversation. Can you imagine how refreshing it would be to have a VP who really viewed that as their job? And it is, like Kamala Harris is speaking today at the American Federation of Teachers convention in Houston. And, this is actually the first time in many years, right? Like, think back to the Obama years when they would show up at these conventions and they really viewed their job as throwing cold water on the audience, right? Like a little tough love, that like we're here to explain why we're going to make your life and job harder, and you have to suck it up and take it because you don't have any other choice. And so I absolutely agree with you that having somebody who has that sort of bully pulpit, who can really rally people around this bigger, broader vision of why we have public schools, it's really smart politics right now. There is a reason why in state after state, Republicans are not allowing their own citizens to vote on this stuff. They're, like in a state like Idaho, they tried to keep rural folks from testifying on a voucher bill because they knew they couldn't drive 9 hours to the state capitol in Boise. It's just smart politics to do that. And no, there really hasn't been anybody else in, say, the Biden administration who has played that role. The Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, sometimes he sounds like an Obama era throwback. Yep. Sometimes he's kind of inspiring, but for the most part, who really knows? So yes, I have very high hopes, and like Emma, I am waiting on the edge of my seat, just hoping that they are not dashed again.
I hate Shapiro for many reasons. I mean, he compared the student protesters on Gaza to the KKK. I just praying it's not him for many reasons. But Bashir, what's great about him, and this is kind of widening the conversation, but he can really, I think, speak to rural voters in a way that isn't condescending. And he talks about the opioid epidemic and how you can and contrast that with J.D. Vance, who makes it just kind of a personal pathology for the most part. But what's could be exciting if Bashir is the pick is Kamala Harris. My guess is she's going to run on childcare and elder care, right? And things about like increasing that for folks. And with abortion being on the front at the top of the ticket and women's reproductive care, that could really be a rounded out, holistic ticket about families, schools, how how can we make your family life better by strengthening our public schools, strengthening your ability to have child care and take care of the older people in your life. And she can do that as a woman as well in a way that could be a really exciting opportunity for Democrats if they take it.
I love that idea. And to me, it's so utterly preposterous that the Republicans are now, they are the party of the working class. They are populists. And yet, they have adopted as a litmus test issue that you have to support school choice. And that if you're a rural Republican who views part of your job as standing up for your local public schools, they are going to primary you. And so we've watched this now play out in state after state, in Iowa and Texas, and they're having great success doing this. And so that means that you now have rural Republicans who are no longer represented on this issue. And you think about it, like the public school in a rural community, it's not just the key institution, it's the largest employer.
Yep.
And so you have somebody like a J.D. Vance saying, we're the party of rural populism. And yet, one of their first big moves is to say, hey, we're going to defund the local public school. It's just such an opening for a candidate who really understands that dynamic. And like you were saying, can articulate this stuff in a way that doesn't sound phony or condescending.
What just give me your take on what's happening with Texas, because there's been a real assault or attempt, and there's been a sort of an odd coalition, if I understand what's going on there, maybe not so odd, of like who's been pushing back on these sort of voucher plans.
Yeah, so the key thing you need to know is that the governor, Greg Abbott, has made enacting a private school voucher plan really one of his top priorities. And so in order to do that, they really have to lean hard into the culture war issues. And so, he's been on the stump arguing that there's a rising wave of transgenderism that's threatening to swamp the Texas public schools. And then you have big money coming in. And so Jeff Yass, who is very chummy now with Donald Trump, people will know him as Pennsylvania's richest resident, but also an early investor in TikTok. So he has poured millions and millions of dollars into Texas in order to help Abbott try to enact school vouchers. And they did exactly what I was just describing, where they knocked out all of these rural Republicans who support their local public schools in hopes of now being able to jam this through when the legislature reconvenes. And so, yes, you have odd coalitions on both sides. But I think it's very telling that they, we're now months and months into this and they have not succeeded. And the longer this drags out and the worse the evidence is from other states, it's getting harder to hold up a program like this in a state that doesn't have one, when people can look at Arizona and be like, wow, they've blown an enormous hole in their budget.
Yep.
This does not seem like a good idea. And so on the one hand, Abbott may have the foot soldiers that he needs to do this, but they are going to have a hard time selling this.
Jennifer Berkshire, freelance journalist, co-host of the Have You Heard podcast. The book is The Education Wars, A Citizen's Guide and Defense Manual. You co-authored with Jack Schneider. Really important, I feel like, underlooked, like the ratio between how fundamental public school is to so many sort of like downstream issues, and the amount of attention it gets is way there's just too disparate of a delta there. Really appreciate you coming on. We'll put a link to that book at majority.fm.
Well, I so appreciate your having me, and the fact that both of you appreciate my passion and concern. I feel like we're a party of 3, 4, if you count my co-author, Jack Schneider.
Right. Okay. Send him my regards. All right. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half of the program.
Really hoping she picks Bashir now.
Well, you've become a Bashir fan. Bashir has always been my my first pick for.
Oh, don't worry. I have a bookmarked tweet of mine from July 4th suggesting Bashir. So I just, I like to have receipts because I'm such a sicko. But I
actually think he's got a very good shot. I mean,
me too.
Look, Tim Walz has been great. I don't think
he's getting more buzz than I thought he would. It seems like in the last day or so he's really shot up.
I mean, he looks like the most unintimidating, sort of like if you imagine somebody who's scared of Kamala Harris, Walz looks like he would comfort, be like a big comfort, just sit next to them.
But is
Give
he
him
too
old candy?
Is he too comforting? Like, is he too I mean, they're the same age, by the way. He was joking about that on social media, saying like, how are yes, you would lose your hair if you were in public school working with kids as long as I did, which is funny, right? So he's almost too kindly. Like, I like that Bashir is aggressive and also doesn't use lines of attacks on JD Vance that ring hollow, because he chooses to speak to the same audience, but does it in a way that's constructive and not freaking like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? It could be a reorientation of the way that Democrats speak to areas like Kentucky.
Well, it's been a long time since we've had a nominee, or I should say even someone, Lloyd Benson was from Texas. But it's been, I don't know. I guess it hasn't been that long, but Bill Clinton and Al Gore. I guess.
Lockbox.
I can't even remember. Oh, Kerry was with Edwards. I guess he was from North Carolina. So,
right.
There's some things I've blocked out from my
you don't think
memory.
about Edwards very much.
But
Roy
I think
Cooper would be like a very safe pick, right? But
I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But doesn't Walz have a, isn't the lieutenant governor a Republican in Minnesota? Is that what's going on? There was some, or am I thinking of somebody else? Maybe I'm thinking of Cooper.
You're thinking of Cooper in North Carolina, but that would just be when he's out of state campaigning. And I don't know. The risk is like, do you want to elevate the psychotic lieutenant governor to the position so that North Carolina voters know when they vote in the fall, this guy's psychotic? Or do you not want to put him in that position so the voters can envision him as governor? Right?
That's a good question. What do I think about JB Pritzker? I'm not sure if now's the time to have a billionaire on the ticket.
Yeah,
that's my feeling. Like,
spend the money, buddy.
I'm happy with the governorship that he's done in Illinois. I just don't know if.
Well, it's bad. Like, it's gonna get brought up. It's that stupid story about, he has a good record in Illinois, but I don't trust a billionaire. Sorry. And also, that's that salacious story about how he bought a second mansion near his house. Sam, have you heard about this? And then took out the toilets for tax reasons while they were renovating, or while they were planning on renovating it to build like an estate. So because he bought the mansion next door and took the toilets out, apparently. So he did.
Trump will hammer him on toilets. That's one of his favorite topics.
Wait, what?
The story is that he bought a mansion next door to his other mansion. Again, he's a billionaire.
I mean,
and,
who hasn't?
Right. Took the toilets out of the mansion that was vacant when
was he going to combine the mansions?
He was going to renovate it at
One's
some
a guest
point.
house.
But he took what'd you say?
It's a guest house.
Right. He took the toilets out for a period of time so he didn't have to pay taxes on it as a residence.
A little bit cheap.
You know what? This is the thing.
But then that reminds people he's a billionaire. Like that's the thing. That's the salience of that story.
How much could the taxes be?
I know it's crazy.
I know it's insane. So he's been a very good governor. Like when you look at the accomplishments, and people say he's a class traitor. I believe people who are more well versed in his record than I am, but I just think we got to think about optics.
Let's raise the bar a little bit for that. Let's put
What'd
some
you
more
say?
numbers on the board if you're going to be a class traitor. I mean, I agree he's fine.
Apparently,
but
Bashir was on Morning Joe this morning.
He has been making the rounds and acting like he's already the pick, but it's also just like I can't tell if he's just being thirsty or if he knows something we don't know.
Brennan from Kentucky. Bashir is working with a very conservative legislature, but the fact that he signed into law HB 5, which phases out barrel taxes on the bourbon companies who negotiated huge tax incentives to build warehouses based on the existence of a barrel tax, makes me worried about his neoliberalism and fiscal policy. That's the thing. I mean, that is what favors Walz. Like, you can look at Tim Walz and say, like, okay, we know exactly what we're getting. With Bashir, you don't know. You assume that, he's been working with a conservative legislature. Maybe he doesn't, but he's also a guy who enfranchised like 180,000, almost 200,000 people, as far as I recall, with like an executive order. So,
yeah, I mean, between Bashir and Walz, because I mean, Walz also vetoed the minimum wage bill for
Uber.
Right. So, like, I mean, they're Democrats, but it's like there are marginally better Democrats, which I would say Walz and Bashir are, and there are marginally worse Democrats like Kelly and Shapiro.
You got to be worried too. People have to keep in mind, 8 years from now, I mean, if all goes well, they'll be on the ticket and they'll be the presumptive nominee. So.
And if they want, the whole thing is they're going future, right? Bashir looks like, again, just these are strategic selections. The VP is a ceremonial role. That's why you can, in some way, like have to look at hints about what Harris believes versus saying like, oh, they'll just be Biden 2.0. It's not going to be Biden 2.0 because she can't dissent as vice president. So it's more about strategy than anything, right? And then,
I mean, I think that like, she's more likely to be Biden 2.0 than any of the other potential candidates were, because when you're governor, right? I mean, if you get to a governorship, more often than not, you've had aides that have been with you for a long time, and you've been working on the same sort of like issue sets. She went rather quickly into the Senate and then into, I don't know. I'd be curious.
But this is where I don't understand that, because she made a point to going before she ran for president to have the quote most liberal voting record in the Senate, more liberal than Bernie. That's what she was saying, right? Like, I don't know how true that is in very smaller sample size versus Bernie Sanders. And we know that that's not the case. If she's Biden 2.0, Biden's been one of the more conservative Democrats throughout his entire career. How
you got to look at who's been staffing. I mean, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and his background from being like from a small state in Delaware versus her in this large, massive state coming up in California in that political machine, they have extremely different backgrounds. Like, so I don't know, outside of her being in the administration, what would indicate that she'd be Biden 2.0. I think she'll probably build on some of what Biden did, the good stuff, because that's more of a reflection of where the party is than what's in her heart, right? And that matters more than anything, except for maybe the Zionism piece, because that seemed to be very much in Biden's.
All right, well, let's take a break. We got so much to do. So much to do, so little time. Folks, you can join us in the fun half. It's not always fun, but sometimes it is. These days has been more fun than it was like a week ago. I can tell you that right now. By becoming a member, join themajorityreport.com. The next 4 months, 3 months are going to be quite a ride. And then, I mean, the 4 years could go one way or they could go another way. But either way is going to be, I think, pretty intense because I think the demands out of Harris are going to be even greater than they were out of Biden. And I think there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm if she ends up being the president. And if Donald Trump ends up being the president with J.D. Vance, then
God help us all.
It's going to be a shit show. Join themajorityreport.com. Join themajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee and hot chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. You can buy the Majority Report blend. They're a great company. They're a co-op. They really, really care about their suppliers in Mexico and Africa and other places. So check them out. Emma, ESVN.
We're off this week, but we'll be back next week because training camp's ramping up. We'll talk a little bit about the Olympics as well once those start in earnest. I guess, is it today? Yeah, today. So we'll have some more info, youtube.com/ESVN show.
Matt.
Yeah, last night on Left Reckoning at the Left Reckoning YouTube channel and other places, Bronco March, Chief of Jacobin, talking about his recent pieces on Joe Biden. He wrote the book Yesterday's Man on Biden in 2020, and also his expansive piece in Jacobin, Which Kamala Are We Going to Get, which I think is a pretty fair assessment of her record leading up to this. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning to support us there.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
Yo.
What is up, everyone? Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?